So if we talk about consciousness, the great self, the consciousness, the infinite consciousness, it's the same consciousness that is conscious of what your ears are hearing right now and what your eyes are seeing. Same consciousness. I'm conscious of these words coming out right now. That is the infinite consciousness right there. But in most of us, that kind of glimpse is not valued. It's not given any kind of significance. Well, I'm just conscious, so what? I've always had this consciousness, no big deal. Or if we stop in between these words I'm speaking and listen to the silence that's there, that is the same infinite silence. What you just heard was the same infinite silence. When we listen to the silence, infinite silence, the quietness, that is it right there. So when I recognize intuitively that I am infinite in every way, it's the same silence, the same consciousness that you've recognized in between these words. And the same consciousness that's conscious of your thoughts, conscious of not having a glimpse. If I ask you to be aware of how your body feels right now, is your body comfortable or uncomfortable? Is it hungry? Is it tired? Is it in pain, or is it blissed out? It's the same awareness, pure awareness that's knowing how your body feels right now. I'm aware of how my body feels. We say that, but do we really give any significance to that awareness? Also, if you walk into a room, or if you just look at the room you're sitting in right now, how much significance do you give this infinite space? Much more significance is given to the objects in the room than the space in which those objects are appearing. And if we're all really honest, isn't the space kind of treated as just something absolutely unimportant, necessary? It's there, but we never give it any attention at all. Much more attention goes to what I'm aware of than the awareness. Much more attention is probably going to the words I'm speaking right now than the silence that's underneath them and around them and inside them. Are you listening to these words trying to get something out of them? Or are you just listening and hearing the silence in the words, the silence in the words? When I began to really get this, it began to change everything. This same silence I'm glimpsing now, hearing, is a beautiful infinite silence that all the masters and sages and teachers have spoken about, all the awakened beings. So then my question became, well, why is my experience of it different? If one being can listen to the infinite silence and feel waves of peace and bliss and joy and just feel utterly moved to tears, why, when I listen to the silence, is it just dull and boring? What's the difference in that? And how do I go about having the same kind of depth of intimacy with the silence as these great teachers and sages must have be having? I can't seem to speak this morning, so bear with me. Why, in one body, mind vehicle, does hearing the silence produce these waves of infinite peace? And why, where I was at the time, when I listened to silence, does it bring frustration, despair? And it's got to be only one thing: my ideas about the silence. So if I'm listening to the silence or noticing the space in the room or recognizing my awareness, but firstly, I feel I'm separate to that awareness. And here is, in the glimpse, there's a hope for something else, something extraordinary. I want a glimpse of something extraordinary. Right there in that word, extraordinary. Mustn't it be hidden right inside what is ordinary and overlooked by most human beings? What if every single moment your senses are perceiving, you can't get away from the self, but what you're seeing is not valued? Can you see how if I asked you whether you wanted to focus on the objects in the room, the people in the room, or the empty space, most human beings would say, well, the things that are moving and changing are much more important, much more valuable. Same with inside our consciousness. I'd much rather focus on the energy that's moving, the thoughts, the emotions, rather than the consciousness, which is noticing them. And the consciousness is just taken for granted in most human beings. It's always been there. As long as you can remember, it's always been there. It always will be there. So therefore, it's taken for granted. It's not changing. It's not moving. It's not becoming. And it's taken for granted. Because it's taken for granted, we don't experience the fullness of it. So every idea I'm believing about the consciousness, about myself, about the world, about everyone else, about awakening, is diminishing in this moment my experience of that consciousness, of that silence, of that awareness. The reason it feels so nice when I have a glimpse, the stereotypical glimpse, is because I don't have any ideas about it in that moment. I'm just open and experiencing it. Life force floods through the body unimpeded. Every time I believe a thought, I'm cutting down some of the life force that can flow through the body. Peace and joy and bliss are really symptoms of unimpeded life force flowing through. So what happens then if I take what I've taken for granted, all of my existence, the one thing that's always been with me, and actually begin to really get curious? Have I actually seen perhaps the thing that's been here all the time in the background of my experience? Silence. No different than the silence we're hearing right now. And begin to really get curious as to what it actually is. Have we ever really listened to the silence that's been here in the background of every single sound we've ever heard, internally or externally? The stillness which pervades all of this movement. Have we really paid attention to it with a deep curiosity? And how can we ever expect to experience the richness of that silence if we don't value it at least as much as we value the phenomena, the sounds moving and changing in it, the noise of thoughts, the noise of my cat meowing, the noise of cars going past, all of that? What happens when we approach the ordinary, the taken for granted, and begin to treat it like it might actually be extraordinary? Maybe that's what all these great beings have done. And even if the silence just feels irrelevant, unimportant, dull, boring, just a necessary gap between the words, what if I don't actually subscribe to that anymore? What's my experience going to be like then? When I'm actually open to experience what it actually really is. A deep and abiding curiosity, a fascination with it, at least as fascinated as I've been in the coming and goingness of phenomena.